We continue now at the top of Daf Chof Beis and Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma Daf 22b. On the previous Amud, there's a machlokas Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish in terms of Eish, in terms of fire, is the reason why Eish Chaya because of Chetzio, because it's like his arrow. That's Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. And Reish Lakish's opinion is the reason is because Isho Mishum Amono, his fire is considered to be like his property, is causing damage. And the Gemara assumes that when Reish Lakish says Isho Mishum Amono, it's only true if the fire, the coal, actually belongs to the person. Otherwise, there would be no chiyuv. And so the Gemara asks from a Mishnah later on. The Mishnah talks about a situation where a person loads up their camel with flax, and then the animal enters into the store, into a store which has a candle, which has a fire. So in that situation, it's really not the owner of the store's fault. The fire was inside the store, the candle was in the store, and the animal then goes out, and the flax that's on the animal's back is full of fire and causes a building to burn down. So then we say the owner of the animal is going to be chayiv. But if the storekeeper put the candle outside of the store, then the owner of the store is going to be chayiv. And so the Gemara said, how do we explain this? According to Reish Lakish, this candle clearly does not belong to the owner of the camel. Why should the owner of the camel ever be chayiv? And so the Gemara ultimately said on the previous Amud that the case actually is where the fire doesn't spread at all, but the entire flax is on fire, and it's the same size as the building that burns down. It was essentially a direct damage from the animal to the building, and that's why we say that the owner of the camel is going to be chayiv again when the candle is inside of the store. But the Gemara said if that's the case, even when the candle is outside of the store, but it's a direct damage from the animal, why should the owner of the store be chayiv in that case? And the Gemara explained on the previous Amud that the case is the animal is standing still and urinating, and again there's so much flax on the back of the animal that it's a direct damage. But that's why we make the following distinction. Reish, in the first case of the Mishnah, Baal Gomel chayiv, the owner of the camel is chayiv, because he shouldn't have loaded up his camel so much, and therefore it's his fault in that case. It's not the storekeeper's fault. However, in the end case of the Mishnah, Chenvani chayiv, the storekeeper is chayiv, he shouldn't have placed his candle on the outside. And again, in that situation, it wasn't really the owner of the camel's fault. He couldn't move the camel because the camel was urinating, and that's why it's going to be the storekeeper that's chayiv in that case. Rashi says, La fushe, gamle b'ti'ina, he shouldn't have put his camel have so much loaded up that it would then enter, and then it's going to enter into the store and cause that damage. And again, that's why we make a distinction between the Reisha and the Seifa. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, come and hear a proof from the following Mishnah. Hamadlikes hagadish, if somebody lights a stack of grain on fire, v'haya gedi kaposlo, and there's a goat that's tied to it, ve'evet samachlo, and there's an eved, there's a slave nearby, v'nisraf imo, and everything gets burned together with this stack of grain, the gedi gets burned, the eved gets burned, so chayiv, so in that situation, he's chayiv, he has to pay for the damage that was done to the gedi in that case. Eved kaposlo, now let's say the eved is tied there, ugedi samachlo, and the goat is nearby, v'nisraf imo, and everything gets burned, so in that case, it's considered to be a case of a murder of the eved. The first case is not a murder of the eved because the eved should have run away, but in the second case, it's actually considered to be murder, and therefore in that situation, potter, in that case it's potter because he's actually chayiv misa, and we apply the rule of kimle b'deraba minei, you get the greater punishment, you're only going to get the misa, you're not going to have to pay money. Rashi explains, Vayagadi kapos lo lagadish, again the goat was tied to the stack of grain, ve'evet samach lo lagadish, and the slave is near the stack of grain, v'nisraf imo chayiv, and it all gets burned, agadi you're chayiv on the goat, v'agadish, and on the stack of grain, lefisha ein lo din misa. The point is, again, there's no death penalty, b'shvil ha'evet, because of the slave, shayalo levrach, because the slave could have ran away. But eved kapos lo, gadi samach lo v'nisraf imo pater, but if the eved is tied over there, so then pater, agadi v'agadish, he's pater on the goat and on the stack of grain, to come because he gets the greater punishment. Shahoreg ha'eved nerag dechsiv nakum yinakim, because if he kills the eved, he actually gets killed. It's the death penalty. The reason why we're talking about a goat over here is because we're going to talk about later on. We're about to say that the gedi was owned by one person, the eved was owned by a different person. The v'gadish v'eved leka leukmei hachi deorcha demilsa l'shadurei inish avdei lishmor gedisha. You can't say that the gadish belonged to someone else because it's normal that a person sends his eved to protect his own gadish. Now, since by the eved we talk about tied up and nearby, so we use the same language by the goat. Now, even though you're not going to say the goat should have run away, should have known to run away, because the goat doesn't have any knowledge or understanding. You're chayiv even if it's not tied up or nearby. Like we say in the later parak, Point anyway is that's why we use the same language. That's not critical by the Gedi, but it is critical when it comes to the Eved. In any case, the Gemara now says, now I can explain this Mishnah according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that fire is considered like his arrows. Mishum hachi pater, so for that reason, you're pater in the case where the Eved is killed, it's considered to be murder. It's like he murdered him with an arrow when he murders him with fire. But according to the one who says that a fire is considered like the person's property, and that's why you're chayiv, because his property does damage. Amai pater, so why in the safe of the Mishnah is he pater for paying for the gedi and the stack of grain? Why is he pater in that case? Because of kamle b'deravimine. Ilu katal torei avda, let's say his ox would kill an Eved. Hachinami d'lo mechayiv, would you think in that case that he's not chayiv? In that case, of course you're going to be chayiv. That's not a case of kamle b'deravimine. It's not considered to be murder if a person's ox kills the Eved. So therefore, why are we making such a distinction in the Mishnah? Rashi says, in katal torei avda, let's say a person's ox kills an Eved. Hachanami d'lo lechayiv mammon, are you saying he's not chayiv to pay money? Of course you're chayiv to pay money. Haksiv kesef shloshim shkalim yitin ladon, if it's actually a pasuk, it says you have to pay a 30 shekel fine in that situation. So therefore, according to Reish Lakish, who says Ishu Mishum Amono, there does not seem to be a way to explain this Mishnah. And the Gemara continues, Amar Lach Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Reish Lakish can respond to as follows: Here, what is the case? Kishehitzis begufo shel Eved. He actually places the fire directly on the body of the Eved, so it's not a situation of a normal eish that goes by itself. It is a direct murder to kamle b'derabmine. So we do in fact apply the rule of kamle b'derabmine. It's considered to be that he's chayiv misa. He doesn't pay any money. The Gemara says, but if that's the case, so what's the chiddush? It's so obvious that he's pater in terms of paying money. And the Gemara says, lo no tzrich, it's necessary, begedi dechad ve'eved dechad, like Rashi just said, we're talking where the goat was owned by a different person and the Eved was owned by another person. You might have thought, well, if it's a different person who owns the goat, you should have to pay that individual. And so that's what the chiddush is. You don't have to pay that individual. Rashi says, shehitzis begufo shel Eved davadai mamish hargo, he directly kills him. Begedi dechad ve'avda dechad, we're talking where the goat belongs to a different person. And so therefore it's teaching us, even though he's not chayav misa for what he did to the goat, still the owner of the goat, who's a different individual, is going to lose out. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof from the following Mishnah, let's say a person sends a fire in the hands and the possession of a deaf mute or an imbecile or a minor, so in that case he's pater in terms of any judgments in the courts, in the regular courts, but in Dinei Shamayim, in the heavenly court, he's going to be chayiv. And in any case, the Gemara says, I understand, according to the one who says that a fire is considered to be his arrows, so it makes sense to say that it would be pater in this case, because it's considered the arrows of the deaf mute, it's not considered his own arrow, and therefore pater. But according to the person who says that his fire is considered like his property, so it's like he's giving a shore over to the cheresh. Ilu masar shor lecheresh shot v'katan. Let's say a person would give over his axe to a cheresh shot v'katan. Hachinami d'lo mechayiv. You think in that case he wouldn't be chayiv? Of course he'd be chayiv. That's a direct negligence in terms of watching the shore. He's not watching his own shore properly. He's not watching his eish properly. So of course he should be chayiv. You cannot explain this Mishnah according to Reish Lakish. And the Gemara continues, Ha'itmar Allah, but it was stated on this Mishnah, Reish Lakish actually explained it. Amar Reish Lakish mishmei de Chizkiah, that Reish Lakish said in the name of Chizkiah, Lo shanu el kishamasar lo gacheles v'liba, that we only learn this situation in a case where he gives him, let's say, a coal and then he causes the fire. Aval masar lo shal heves, but if he would actually give him a flame, so chayiv, so indeed he would be chayiv. My time, what's the reason? Bari hazeka, because it's certain that the damage is going to occur. So Reish Lakish actually does make that distinction and says, in a situation of Bari hazeka where he's giving it over and it's certain to cause a damage, he actually would be chayiv. Rashi explains, if he gave over his axe to a cheresh, you think he's not chayiv. We actually say in the first parak that that's one of the stringencies by shore over fire, that if you give to a cheresh, it's chayiv. And the Gemara said, Reish Lakish explained, Gacheles v'liba, if he gives him a coal and he causes the fire, hacheresh de lo dami l'shor. The cheresh causes the fire. That's not like an axe. The shore mizuman lahazik, because a shore is ready to damage. Aval had de gacheles cheresh avid lehazik. But if he gives him a coal, so it's really the deaf mute that's causing the damage. But if he gives him a flame, so bari hazeka, it's already certain there'll be damage. Mizuman hazeka, the damage is prepared, it's ready to go. V'havi kashora, that's exactly identical to the case of the axe, and that works out according to Reish Lakish. And the Gemara continues, how does Rabbi Yochanan explain? Rabbi Yochanan says, Afila shalheves pater. Rabbi Yochanan actually says, even if he gives him a shalheves, even if he gives him a flame, we also say pater in that case. As Rashi explains, Rabbi Yochanan amar Afila shalheves pater. Rabbi Yochanan ataymi damar ishum mishum chetzio. Rabbi Yochanan follows his opinion that Aish is considered like his arrows. V'acha chetzio de cheresh, and here it's considered to be the arrow of the cheresh, and that's why we're going to say pater according to Rabbi Yochanan, even by shalheves. Again, because kasavar tzavza de cheresh kagarim, because he holds that it's actually the actions of the deaf mute that are causing the damage, and you're not chayiv, lo mechayiv, but he won't be chayiv at the maser gavza silsa v'sharga. He's only going to be chayiv if he gives him dry wood, and he gives him the small kinds of wood, where it's a total negligence. Certainly it's going to cause a fire. A complete negligence only in that case, Rabbi Yochanan would say chayiv. Rashi says, gavza is eitzim yaveshim, again dry wood, v'silsa eitzim katanim dakim, thin pieces of wood, and he gives him a candle as well. Tahayvadei poshehu, in that case he certainly is negligent. Only in that situation would Rabbi Yochanan say chayiv. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Kro masnisa Messiah leila Rabbi Yochanan. There's a pasuk and a brisa that support Rabbi Yochanan. Kro dichsiv, from the pasuk, it's written in the pasuk as follows, Ki seitzei eish, it says when the fire goes out, Teitzei me'atzma, meaning it goes out on its own, Yeshalim hamavir es ha'be'era. So then the person who creates the fire has to pay. Shma mino, you see from the phrasing of the pasuk, Isho mishum chetzio, that by fire the chiyuv is because it's like his arrow. Rashi says, Teitzei me'atzma mashma. The word Teitzei sounds like it's going on its own. You can't say that the pasuk is talking about where he himself lights the stack of grain of his friend. Rather, the mashmos of the pasuk is that he's making the fire in his own property. He's not directly lighting the gadish of his friend. The fire is going on its own. And still, we're calling the person the mavir es habe'era, the one who created this fire, as if he did it himself. You see from that very phrasing that it's as if his fire is his arrow. And the Gemara continues, Masnisa, the Brisa, also supports Rabbi Yochanan. The Tanyas we learned in a Brisa, Pasach HaKasav, the Pasach opens up, it begins with, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video, on Daf Chav Gimel Amud Aleph.